Hello there, and welcome back to Gundam Lore. I just got back from seeing the new Gundam Hathaway movie, Mobile Suit Gundam Hathaway, The Sorcery of Nymph Circe, which is a huge mouthful, but I had a fantastic time. Sadly, there were not too many people in my theater. I hope the movie does well stateside. There were definitely more than the last one I went to for Erdier Hunt, or however you say that, for Iron-Blooded Orphans. But I had a really great time. They also gave me these little trading cards that I think are pretty cool. Can go through those. Yeah, and then they all have the same back with the movie poster on them. But I had a really, really good time. I thought it was to kind of skip ahead, I thought it was a fantastic adaptation of the book that was very, very faithful until the end, and we're going to talk about that. We're going to kind of go in sections, and I'm going to talk about just the different parts of the movie, my thoughts about it. If you want to know more of my thoughts about overall Hathaway, I'll have a little pop-up here. I've covered the third book on the channel already, and the ending, and all my feelings around that, and just how I felt about the trilogy as a whole. So definitely check that out if you want to know my thoughts on the trilogy as a whole. But let's get into Hathaway Part 2. The movie starts off with the Owen Belly massacre, which I thought was really, really interesting. We don't actually see that in the books. We just kind of see the aftermath of that. So it was really cool to see that in a first-person perspective, and I felt like it kind of gave a taste of the segment in the first movie where Hathaway and Gigi are fleeing the city, while the giant mechs are fighting over them and stuff. It was sort of a callback to that moment, I felt like. And I felt like that was something that really helped the pacing of this movie, because when I read the book, the part 2 of Hathaway is a lot of talking. It's a lot of moving pieces around the board and getting ready for the finale that is going to take place in Adelaide. But part 2 itself doesn't have that much action in it. So I think opening on an action scene was a really, really good call. We move on from that, though, and we get a lot of crew interactions, which I was really happy about. I absolutely love the Mafty crew. I wished in the first book, I wished in the first movie that we fleshed them out a lot more, because the books do a much better job of that. We get a lot more of Emeralda and Raymond. They're kind of a couple, and we get to actually kind of see that in this movie with them flirting in the background and stuff. I don't know how noticeable it is if you haven't read the book and you're not looking for it, but as somebody who did and was looking for it, it was there. That made me happy. We get some more of Gallman, who I think is a really neat character. And then we get some of Hala as well, this like Harley Quinn looking girl, and she is not as present in the books. So she's kind of an interesting addition. She doesn't do a whole lot, but I think it just helps to have less generic faces around Mafty to help us kind of connect with the characters more. And while I was having an easy time connecting with the characters, Hathaway is not. We get a lot more on Hathaway and Kelia, or Keria. It was hard to... the translation I read of the novels had her name spelt as Keria, so every time they say Kelia, I'm like, oh, it's a little bit different, but that's okay. This is one of the biggest changes from the books, because we get this whole montage of Hathaway and Kelia's relationship throughout their lives. We see that she has been by his side the entire time, kind of from when he first got into Mafty to moving up the ranks to kind of becoming Mafty and becoming this sort of charismatic figure that he has become when we're joining him in the movies. She was there by his side the whole time, and we kind of get this romance between the two of them that they've shared. And man, the books do not have that. Hathaway really does not love Kelia in that way. She is sort of his childhood friend in the books, but the most grating part of that relationship, you actually get a sort of window into Hathaway's thoughts where he says Kelia is really like a boy. That's like a direct quote, that he thinks she is like a boy. And he really is not attracted to her in that way. And the love the romantic connection is almost entirely one-sided on her side. And that puts his relationship with Gigi in an entirely different light, because in the books, you don't feel like there's any kind of betrayal happening. You know, in this movie, we get a lot of gossip around the ship of people whispering, you know, I'm sure him and Gigi have fooled around, and they've probably slept together, they've been on dates, they're an item. And Kelly is really struggling with that, and we get a lot of that on the ship, but in the books, that just isn't the case. Or it is, but, like, there's not a guilt there. There's no, like, attribution that, like, Hathaway should be being faithful to her, because it is so one-sided that you're like, he doesn't care. He's never cared. You get kind of the gist, at least I did, that he had made that clear a couple times, but was still kind of struggling with letting her down easy. But seeing, you know, the window into his head, you don't feel like there's an emotional betrayal happening. Whereas in the movie, yeah, it definitely feels more like an emotional betrayal, like he's kind of cheating on her. This is his girlfriend, and that adds another layer of sort of selfishness to Hathaway, and I think contributes more to his unraveling mental state, which we're going to get into a little bit more here in just a little bit. Next we come to Gigi, who is going out to the Count's home, and I really like this segment as well because I think it's supposed to kind of show to you the opulence that the Federation high class lives in, you know, and really juxtapose that with a lot of the poorer people we met in Hathaway Part 1. Instead of, you know, people going to the Jollibee and selling little trinkets to survive while they're constantly threatened by the Manhunters, it's just this beautiful neighborhood where nothing bad ever happens. There's plants everywhere. It's just gorgeous. And we get this montage that I have very mixed feelings about. I think it was very well done and I enjoyed it, but I went to the movie with a friend who has not read the books and is not nearly as into Gundam as I am. She ended up feeling like Gigi was just really dumb throughout the movie, and I don't agree, but I do understand how she got there, how she ended up thinking that, and I think that a scene that would have really helped was skipped over in that montage. So what actually happens is this guy you see on the screen right now that's taking Gigi into the mansion, he says, you know, you can buy all the furniture outright just as it is, or you can order some from these catalogs I have for you. Just let me know, and we'll work that out. And Gigi catches on pretty quick that this guy is getting very large kickbacks to do this from furniture providers, and he does this for all of the Federation higher-ups in this area. And this he kind of has this racket going, this kind of monopoly, where he's taking advantage of all these rich people and upcharging them a bunch. And him and Gigi get into a big fight, and she's like, no, I am not going to just waste money because that's dumb. And she ends up throwing him out of the mansion. And all of that gets skipped over. I think the only implication they have of it is she, like, pulls some other catalogs out of his hands, and then you can see her, like, locking him out or something. But I really missed that sort of moment of her taking ownership and stuff. And that's something that it seems like people are missing a lot about her character. I've read some of the critic reviews of this movie, and they're like, well, Gigi kind of just gets passed around. And I highly disagree. She decides in every instance where she is going to be and who she's going to be with. All of that from her, from us meeting her on the Hanjin in Part 1, is her choice from there onwards. I really liked the scene of her leaving the Count, and in the book, I can't quite remember, I should have checked before starting, I think she writes him a letter or something, but she really does feel bad to be abandoning him, because she's like, yeah, he's just this lonely old man, and he's, you know, paid me for companionship, and I really do care about him. But yeah, I liked how this was done, and I like how Gigi phrases her leaving, that she looks in the mirror and says, like, I need to go essentially make mistakes and things while I'm young. the kinds of mistakes I can only get away with while I'm young. So I'm not quite ready to just settle down and be your companion yet. So after Gigi leaves the Count, she goes back to Kenneth, who we pick up with as he's hanging out with Mace Flower. And if you don't remember, Mace Flower is the flight attendant from the Hanjin at the start of Hathaway Part 1. Kenneth, it seems like, has decided to pursue a relationship with her until Gigi shows up and makes her leave. And in the movie, they don't say, you just see Gigi whisper into her ear, and then she slaps her and leaves, and you're like, I wonder what she said. In the books, we actually see that. The books, she tells Mace Flower that, like, maybe Kenneth just prefers the company of a younger woman or something. It's something to that effect, about her being the younger, hotter woman. And she chases Mace Flower off. So that's what's actually said there. But Kenneth is kind of into it. Gigi just kind of has this allure that both Hathaway and Kenneth can't pull away from. And I think some of that is her new type powers, and some of that is just her being this interesting, charismatic girl. Anyway, we pick up with Hathaway and company going to investigate the Owen Belly massacre, and it's real dark. I've definitely seen some complaints that the movie is dark, not just in tone, but in actual lighting and contrast. You can see on the screen right now, this is part of that scene, and yeah, it is very dark, which is fine. It doesn't bother me, because in the movie theater and stuff, like, that's fine. But it does seem to bother some people, so just know that going in. But yeah, Hathaway and company go investigate the Owen Belly massacre, and they find all these people that have been tortured and stuff. This is all in the book as well. And the book, I think, is even a little bit more descriptive, but I liked how this was handled. They find the one survivor, who is a woman that has been... The book, I think, implies that she's been repeatedly sexually abused, and Hathaway is really challenged here, because he's like, we are the moral high ground. We're better than the Federation. We don't torture people. We don't do bad things. Outside of, the stuff that we say we're gonna do. But he sees this woman and is really bothered by it. And he confronts Kimberly about it, which is Kenneth's, the guy that Kenneth is replacing, his former higher-up. And Kimberly says in the movie, well, they were mutilating our pilots. And it's like, yeah, but your pilots are on the front lines of a war, and they're in battle, and I don't think anybody is batting an eye at soldiers dying in normal soldier dying ways. But it's a little bit hard to track, I think, the way it's set up, and I think that's okay. But Kimberly basically says, well, they were mutilating our pilots, and the unspoken thing is, so that's why we repeatedly sexually abused at least one of these prisoners. And Hathaway's just really bothered by that, because it's like, how does that make you do that? I don't think it does. I don't think that seeing soldiers die in battle, because Hathaway has seen that. Everybody around him has seen that. And they are not that kind of person. So I think he really struggles with that, and he talks about, maybe we should just turn them over to the Owen Belly forces and let them figure out what to do with them. And that is a threat, because their leader, Fabio here in the beret, doesn't do things quite the way that Mafty does, despite him posing as Hathaway. They aren't actually connected. His forces call themselves Mafty because they're sympathetic to the cause, and they are also anti-Federation. But until they actually meet, in this scene, there is no, coalition between the two of them. They're just both using the same name. And Fabio was exactly how I pictured him in the books. This is the exact kind of guy that I had in mind. He is charismatic, he's kind of goofy, but he's also a radical who is really, really serious. Kind of like a Saw Gerrera Star Wars type that's like, I am willing to do whatever I need to do for the cause. So yeah, I really, really liked how Fabio was portrayed. And he also talks to them about, we have this video of the Owen Belly massacre that we're going to start circulating. And I don't remember if that's in the books or if it just sort of happens. I think it's more in... I thought it was more towards book 3 that the video comes out. But it is a really great scene when that happens, I guess we can just go ahead and skip to that. So the video shows giant mobile suits scooping up people who are fighting them who don't have mobile suits and doing things like crushing them until they're goo. And it's a really gory video, and it does not paint the Federation in a good light. And again, that would be Kimberly leading that attack. So the Fabio forces do circulate that video to the press, and it makes its way to TV. There's a news station that airs it. And we get a scene of Kenneth and Yaksan. If you don't remember who Yaksan is, he is the sort of police chief that heads up the manhunting division. And they kind of talk to each other and talk about how they're going to get this off the air with another Federation higher up. And it's just more evidence of corruption in the Federation because, you know, it depends, I guess, if you believe on a free press, but it is a real video. And they're like, we absolutely cannot allow that to be out there. We cannot allow the Federation to be depicted this way. So we are going to take care of it and come after that news agency. So Yaksan, not really a good guy. Kenneth, it's debatable. It's very debatable. And that's something that I really, really like about the Hathaway story as a whole, that you can really debate both of them. And Gundam as a whole, really. Like, you know, I don't think anybody is fully the villain or fully the hero. The Federation is a lot of times depicted as the hero, but they, since the very beginning, have done a lot of really questionable stuff. And so, you know, in these movies, I think we're seeing more of them as the villain, but part of that's because we're following the character of Hathaway through this whole story. But also, Hathaway does some bad stuff, you know, even in movie 1, shooting the hotels and stuff is a level of bad. I don't think normal people look at that and go, yeah, that's something that you should do, even in sort of the fog of war. And then there's this great scene where Gallman is fighting Kenneth's pilots, and he's like, he puts his back to the city, and he's like, well, they won't shoot at me because they might hit the city. They immediately shoot at him and light the city up, and he's like, oh no, they're willing to do anything it takes. So it's like, there's levels to this. Neither is doing good things. This also gets into kind of more the meat of the movie. It is a lot of talking about ideology and politics and things like that. And I've seen some people really, really jazzed about that, myself included. I love the fantasy politics of Gundam. I love getting into the different ideological thought exercises and debates about who's doing the right thing, who's more in the right, who's less in the right. But I've definitely seen some people be like, more giant robots hitting each other, please. This is too much talking. And I can see it from both ways. I think if you're really, really into Gundam, you're going to appreciate a lot of that talking. If you are less into Gundam and less invested in the universe, I think that visually there's a little bit less for you to look at there. And speaking of stuff to look at, we've got to talk about Hathaway and the stuff he is seeing. This is like what I was talking about with his unraveling mental state. Sorry if my camera's lagging a little bit there. I said in my last video, after reading the whole trilogy, I am of the personal opinion that Hathaway is not a new type. I don't think he is. And I think that him seeing quests a lot, which happens throughout this movie, he just talks to her and she like will appear over his shoulder in the shower. She's sitting on a co-pilot seat when he sits down. He is just haunted by the ghost of quests. And I don't think it's new type stuff. I don't think it's space magic. I think he is deeply traumatized, and he does not know how to grapple with falling in love with this girl and her being killed in front of him. We do get him thinking about Char's counterattack as well, and we see him murder Amuro's girlfriend, Chan, all over again. And I thought that was really interesting to sort of put into context, because in the original Char's counterattack novel, Chan is not a character. That entire interaction goes a little bit differently. I went and double-checked to make sure I'm totally right. And yeah, it's Hathaway that shoots Quest in the actual novel. So it's really interesting reading the Hathaway books that I had to keep in the back of my mind that the movie version of Char's counterattack is not what the books are based on. They're based on the book version of Char's counterattack. But I felt like the trauma he was experiencing could have been because of shooting Chan. But this very directly says, yeah, he shot Chan. Yes, that is the canon thing that happened. And that is what this is related to. Yeah, he just keeps seeing quests everywhere, and that is not all he sees. I wondered how we were going to deal with this because, like I said earlier, the pacing of Book 2 is very much a talky book. It is moving stuff around, and there is not a... The climactic moment is Hathaway and Gigi reuniting, which happens because she gets a new type inkling that something might be going on at this landmark, Ayers Rock, and she wants to go visit it. So Kenneth sends her with a little group of people to go look at Ayers Rock. Hathaway is there. He shoots down the two mobile suits with her immediately and reclaims Gigi, and they are excited to see each other again, and that ends Book 2. That is not what happens in the movie. Well, it is, but Lane Aim, the pilot of the Penelope and Kenneth's ace pilot, he says he gets an inkling. I'm not sure that he's a new type either, but he decides to go with them, kind of hanging further back. He shows up in a new experimental mobile suit that looks a whole lot like Amuro's new Gundam, which is crazy. I was not expecting that at all. So the end of the movie deviates a lot, and it has this whole, like, fight scene between Hathaway and Lane Aim, but Hathaway is not seeing him as Lane Aim. He starts to, I don't think it's new typeness. I think he's hallucinating that Lane Aim is actually Amuro. And I think that's because Hathaway is also really struggling to match what he's doing to the figures of the people that he's been brought up by. And what I mean by that is his father holds duty in very high esteem. Bright, who we see in this movie, and I definitely teared up because that's my boy, but Bright has this sense of duty, which is why he's still here. It's why he's still in the Federation after all these years. Everybody else that we have ever gotten connected to is gone. They've either died or retired. Rightly so. They have done their time. They're out. But not Bright. Bright is still around, still kicking, still doing the exact same thing he's been doing this whole time, which is crazy. I love the dedication. But I imagine that Bright raised Hathaway with stories about Amuro and Camille and Judo, and he told him these stories of these great men who believed in, the hope of people, that people will figure it out, and Hathaway doesn't believe that. He's gotten jaded, and he doesn't believe people can figure it out and overcome the corruption of the Federation. He believes that just oppresses good people and keeps them from figuring stuff out. And in doing so, he's more following in the footsteps of a figure like Char, whereas Lane Aim is keeping that hope alive and saying, no, we will figure it out. And he sounds like Amuro. So it's kind of this clash of these ideologies, and we are following Char in this type of, theoretically, ideologically, we're following Char in this. And the villain of the story is the Gundam boy. It's the Amuro figure. We are the rival in this case, which I think is really, really cool. I really liked this scene of him fighting with Amuro about the hope of people and the sacrifice of Char's that took place during Char's rebellion. And it is such a cool way to get in a more climactic battle so that the movie doesn't end just talking again, which I really think does help it out. I worried because I'd heard that this was very faithful to the book until the end. I really worried if this would bother me, but no. I thought it was a great addition, and also kind of helps flesh out more of the rivalry between Hathaway and Lane, because they originally have only fought once, and I'm not going to spoil what happens in book 3 because you're not here for that, but them seeing each other additional times adds. That's all I'm going to say about that. I will talk a tiny bit more here, though, about why I don't think Hathaway is a new type. And it's not just that, because I know there's going to be people that disagree with that, and I wondered if the movies would take that in a different direction than the book, because the books, like I said, I came to that conclusion after reading the books. Movie 1 didn't convince me. I wondered if movie 2 would just definitively be like, yes, he is a new type. I don't think it does. I think it does the opposite. If you look really close, anytime we see a new type fighting, go to Amuro or Camille, they get these inklings that are, I forget what it's called. It's like the vibraphone thing, the little sound effect that plays when new type stuff happens. And they go, ha, and they turn, and they react to things before they happen. They react to enemies shooting at them or coming up in their blind spots before they should be able to. Hathaway does not do that a single time. Every single time he reacts to anything, it is because his Zhai Gundam tells him to. There's a little heads-up display that beeps at him that indicates, hey, you need to focus your attention on this thing, and then he does. That is what happens. I paid really close attention to it. That is what happens every single time. He doesn't ever react to anything before it happens. The only thing that I think people might point out that is like him being new typey at all is the very beginning of Hathaway Part 1. We hear that new type sound and he reacts to the plane hijackers. I think you can go back to the origin and you can see in those movies, Char gets into a fight before his new typeness has awakened, and Lala has these new type inklings, and she sort of telepathically reaches out to Char and tells him what's gonna happen. And after that happens, he's like, what was that? So I'm like, I think that is Gigi doing that to Hathaway at the beginning. I don't think that's him doing that, I think that's her doing that. I don't think anybody else in this story is a new type. I think it's just Gigi. And that's part of what makes this so interesting, and part of what, like, mixes up the dynamic even more. In that, I already talked about, like, Tomino casts Hathaway as the Char figure, Lane is the Amuro figure. Neither of them are new types. That is a entirely separate character in Gigi, who is sort of in between them. And I think that's more of what Tomino is going for. And I think that just makes for a really, really cool story. I really, really enjoyed this movie. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the reception that it's gotten, and why I think that is. The critical reception, that is. So the critical reception has been kind of mixed. I'm going to be honest, I don't really care what critics have to say, but it does still, for the masses, help or hurt a movie's reputation. Gundam is hard. It's hard. I would not want to be the guy who is supposed to review a Gundam movie if I was not who I am. You have to know what you're capable of doing, and Gundam takes so much to get it. To get what is happening in Hathaway at a very basic plot level. In my opinion, which people disagree with, you do need to watch the origin. So that's 6 movies, right? Then you need to watch the original show. So that's 43 episodes. Then you need to go watch Zeta Gundam, which is 50 episodes. Then you need to go watch Double Zeta Gundam, which is 50 more episodes. And then you need to watch Char's Counterattack, which is another movie. Then you need to watch Hathaway Movie 1. That is the base level, skipping a ton of stuff in between. Movies, shows, books. But that is the very base level that you need to do. That's the basic homework you need to do to understand what is happening in Hathaway Part 2. Reviewers are not, in general, going to do that, because that is too much work. So I've seen a lot of reviewers and critics, like the professionals, say, well, this movie's good if you do the homework. It's weird that there's sort of this caveat that it's like, why would that not be obvious? Maybe something like Downton Abbey would be a better analogy. You know, you're going to go see the Downton Abbey movie that is the finale of the whole thing. And you're like, well, you know, it's good if you watched the show and you, like, know who these characters are and why they're here and what they're doing. And it's like, yeah, obviously that would help you. The one that was the most strange to me is this guy, not to, like, call him out totally, but giant freaking robot. You are a mecha-specific site. So I went to his site. He gives it a 2 out of 5 and says you literally don't care about anything they're talking about. Unless the third film is able to somehow distance itself from being a wordy, self-absorbed drama, then these new Hathaway films are only worth putting on if you're in need of a good nap. That's what it's about. If you're just here for giant robots hitting each other, there's a lot of other stuff that does that for you that requires a lot less homework. And that's not to dog on these guys too much. I just thought that was really interesting, the critic reception and just the sort of lack of respect, I feel like, that Gundam gets. In kind of my wrap-up here, the last thing that I asked my friend who I went with, who has no idea how all this is going to end, I said, okay, after seeing movies 1 and 2, which we watched together, both in the same day, that was super fun, I asked her, how do you think this is going to end? And this is not spoilers, because she has absolutely no idea. She's not read book 3. So the way she predicts this is going to end is that she thinks Kenneth is a hunk of a man. He's super hot. But she's like, that guy is gonna lose. Hathaway is gonna win. Kenneth is gonna die. Gigi is also going to die, probably in some sort of final conflict. And Hathaway is going to end up kind of with the crown on his head. Mafty is going to be ruling instead of the Federation, but none of it is going to look like what he thought it was. And I thought that was really interesting, that, you know, somebody very disconnected from all of this, that's their takeaway. What she thinks the ending of Gundam is going to look like, or the ending of Hathaway is going to look like. I thought that was really cool to, because I don't have the ability to have that perspective anymore. It was cool to get that perspective from somebody else. I also wanted to talk about the music. I don't know where I'm going to put this in. I forgot to record that bit, so I'm tagging it on to the end. But I really got nervous about the music. I really liked the insert songs from the first Hathaway movie. So I got scared when I saw that SZA is going to be, you know, the title track, and then Guns N' Roses is on it. I was like, oh man, I go to a Gundam film to get lost. I go for, like, escapism, and I worry that songs that I know are going to pull me out of that. It ended up being totally fine. I also, they were mixed in very well and felt tonally appropriate, so I was cool with it. I also worried that we wouldn't get enough of the composer, Sawano, because I absolutely adore his soundtrack for the first movie, and totally fine. He had some great compositions in this movie, kind of peppered throughout, and I know I'm going to be listening to that soundtrack a whole lot more. The other thing I needed to talk about that I don't know really where to put in the video, so here is where it's going, is the after credits scene. There is an after credits scene, so make sure you stick around to see that. I thought it was a really weird choice, because it doesn't mean anything to you if you haven't read the books. They're setting up for something in book 3 that I'm not going to spoil here, because you can just go watch my video on book 3, if you want to. If you haven't seen the after credits scene, Kenneth, like, opens this window, and you're looking at a bunch of just, like, poles. And I was like, what am I looking at? I'm looking at a wind farm or something? I was really confused. But it did eventually click. It took a minute, and then it clicked to me what I'm looking at. But I was just kind of like, what a weird after credits thing that, like, only means something if you already know book 3. Which I'm very curious. In the US, almost nobody is going to know what that is. In Japan, I don't know how many people are going to know what that is. You know, in the US, like, Star Wars is our biggest equivalent to Gundam, and if you do something in a Star Wars movie that you are only going to understand if you read the books, I would say like 5% or less of your audience is going to get that, because just not that many people read the books. But I don't know how many people in Japan read the Gundam books. So I'm very curious to see people's reactions to that now that I can look at spoilery stuff. But if you're interested in what's happening in the Gundam books and you don't want to read them, that is what this channel is for. I got you. I'll tell you what happens in the books. That's what I'm doing here. But that's where we're going to wrap it up for today. Like I said, I'm really happy they made this movie. I absolutely adore it. I cannot wait for the third one. I am so excited, and I really wonder if they're going to keep the same ending as the books. I'm not going to spoil it, but it is a doozy of an ending. So all of you should absolutely be looking forward to it. I'm going to shill it one more time. I have a video already done about all of what happens in book 3. I'm going to put a little pop-up on screen. It'll be in the description below. Go check that out if you just can't wait to know how the story ends. But until next time, I have been Gundam Lore, and I will see you in the next one.